The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and rain-soaked coats. My name is Nicholas Fletcher. I am 68 years old, and on that cold morning in Jefferson County, I walked through the courthouse doors with my son Jackson leaning on crutches beside me. His steps were uneven, tapping softly against the marble floor, each sound echoing between the tall stone walls like a metronome marking our dread. Hook. What if the judge knew a secret from the past that could change everything? Stay with Scarred Justice to find out. The morning light filtered through the blinds, slicing the air into stripes of gold and shadow that fell across the faces of strangers who whispered our name. I could feel their eyes tracing the limp of my son, the rumors about his wife, and the quiet pity they did not dare to voice. We moved down the aisle together, the sound of Jackson's crutches blending with the shuffle of our shoes. He was 35, far too young to have the weariness of a man twice that age. His jaw was tight, and his left hand trembled as he clutched the handle of his crutch. I did not speak. There were no words that could make this easier. We reached the defense table, and he sat slowly, breathing through the pain he tried to hide. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the weight of judgment already hanging in the room. Caroline entered moments later. She wore a gray suit sharp as a blade. Her hair perfectly coiled, her heels striking the floor with deliberate rhythm. Behind her, her parents followed like a royal entourage, their expressions painted with superiority. Caroline glanced at Jackson, then at me, her mouth curving into the faintest smile of triumph. She whispered something to her father, and he chuckled quietly, confident that this was already over. They took their seats with the elegance of people who believe they owned the outcome. The clerk called the case. The hum of conversation died down to a low murmur. I could hear the faint rustle of papers and the creak of the judge's door opening. Everyone rose when Judge Elijah entered. He was older than the last time I'd seen him, silver hair at his temples, a heavier frame under the black robe, but his eyes were still sharp, cutting through the room like searchlights. He took his seat, scanned the courtroom, and then his gaze stopped. His eyebrows twitched slightly. I saw recognition spread across his face like a sudden gust of wind. His lips parted, and in a voice meant only for me, he muttered, "Why are you here?" Hook. A retired prosecutor returns to court for his son, but will one old briefcase turn the tide? Keep watching Scarred Justice. The word struck me with a strange familiarity, as if we were standing in another courtroom from another lifetime. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Jackson looked up at me, confusion flickering in his eyes, but I did not respond. I kept my focus on the judge, on the past that was now staring me straight in the face. My heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from something older. It was the discipline that never dies. Elijah cleared his throat and continued with the case as if nothing had happened, but his hands trembled slightly as he shuffled the papers in front of him. Caroline's lawyer whispered into her ear, and she nodded without even glancing our way. I watched her polish the corner of her wedding ring with her thumb, a meaningless gesture now that love had been replaced by calculation. Jackson sat beside me, silent, eyes lowered, his shoulders stiff with shame. I wanted to tell him that he did not have to fight alone, that strength sometimes hides in quiet patience. But I also knew that words could wait. Actions could not. The courtroom air felt heavier by the minute. A photographer adjusted his lens near the back row. The flash went off accidentally, startling a few people. Elijah glared briefly before motioning for him to stop. The echo of the gavel followed, one crisp sound that cut through the stillness and settled the tension for a moment. It reminded me of another gavel, another lifetime when justice was something I carried on my shoulders every day. I reached into my worn leather briefcase and placed it on the table. The sound it made, a low solid thud, carried farther than I expected. Caroline turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing. Jackson glanced at me, puzzled, and I gave a small nod. My hand rested on his for a second, feeling the tremor in his fingers. I leaned closer and whispered that everything would be fine, though my tone carried more certainty than my heart could guarantee. Still, I meant it. The judge's eyes met mine again. There was a question there, and beneath it, something close to unease. I did not blame him. He remembered what I used to be. He remembered the cases, the headlines, the decisions that made enemies and allies alike. Now I was just a father sitting beside his wounded son. Or at least that is what they all thought. I looked down at the briefcase, its edges cracked from years of use, and tightened my grip. The courtroom lights hummed overhead. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, then faded. Inside, the silence thickened again, the kind that comes before a storm. They thought they knew who I was. They would learn soon enough. When I look back, my life feels split in two. The years before my wife died were warm and steady, filled with the rhythm of laughter and the small chaos of raising a boy. After she was gone, everything slowed into silence. I became both father and mother to Jackson, learning to cook, help with homework, and show up at every school event, no matter how late I worked. I was a prosecutor then, spending long days in courtrooms and long nights in empty kitchens, whispering promises to a child who deserved better. Jackson grew up fast. He was clever, patient, and too kind for the world we lived in. When he said he wanted to build things instead of arguing about them, I told him that creating something honest was a kind of justice, too. He studied engineering, saved every cent, and bought a small plot of land near Denver. I watched him turn it into a home. When he handed me the keys and said, "This is ours now, Dad. No one can take it away," I believed him. Then came Caroline. She was bright and charming, the kind of woman who could make a room soften when she laughed. The day they married, she promised Jackson forever, and I let myself believe in peace again. But one evening around 7:10 p.m., the phone rang. There had been an accident. Jackson had fallen at the construction site. The doctor said he would walk again, but only with crutches. He came home different. The man who had built everything with his own hands now moved slowly, carefully, his pride splintered. At first, Caroline cared for him tenderly. She smiled, brought him soup, talked about patience and healing, but her patience thinned as the months passed. Her smile turned brittle. Her laughter came from somewhere far away. She went out more often, coming home late, her perfume heavy and unfamiliar. Dinner became the quietest hour of the day. I would set the table and try to fill the silence with small talk, but it only echoed off the walls. Once, Kennedy asked if Daddy would come to her school play, and Caroline said she'd see what she could do. Jackson just lowered his head, and the silence that followed said everything. Families break slowly in moments like that. One night around 8:25 p.m., I got up for a glass of water and froze outside Kennedy's door. Caroline's voice came low and cold. "If the judge asks, tell them you don't want to live with Daddy. Say he can't take care of you." Then Kennedy's small voice answered, frightened. "But Mom, I love Daddy. I don't want to lie." Caroline's reply was sharper than glass. "Do you want to live poor like them? Say what I told you." The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I backed away, heart pounding, every part of me shaking. Betrayal doesn't shout, it whispers. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my old briefcase in the corner. Its leather was cracked, but strong, waiting. Inside was the card of an old friend, Robert Fields, a retired investigator. I picked up the phone, my voice steady when he answered. "Robert, it's Nick. I need your help one last time." The morning of the hearing carried a sharp stillness. Caroline sat poised beside her lawyer, Elaine Carter, who shuffled papers with rehearsed precision. Jackson stayed quiet, shoulders tight, his crutches resting by the table like mute witnesses. I watched his hand tremble slightly. Every breath he took felt like effort. Judge Elijah entered at 9:30 a.m. and called for statements. Elaine rose with confidence, her voice slicing through the silence. She spoke of freedom, of how her client deserved a life unburdened by obligation. She painted Jackson as a man no longer capable, a shadow of who he once was. Her final line struck hard. "My client seeks only dignity, not duty." Jackson's face stayed still, but his eyes betrayed the pain. I could almost hear the words echo inside him. I stood slowly when Elaine finished. "My name is Nicholas Fletcher," I said, "and I will be representing my son." The entire courtroom froze. Caroline blinked in disbelief. Elijah's eyes widened. Recognition flickered across his face. He leaned forward, his tone softer. "I remember you, Nicholas. I learned law watching your trials." I nodded once. "Then you know I don't walk away from injustice." The weight in the room shifted. I opened my old briefcase and spread the first set of papers on the table. These documents show that the Riverbend property was purchased by Jackson Fletcher in May 2009, 3 years before his marriage to Mrs. Torres. It is his separate asset. The clerk reviewed the files and handed them to Elijah. The judge studied them briefly, his gaze unreadable. Elaine faltered, her voice losing confidence as she admitted her client had no prior record of the purchase. Caroline's face tightened, the color drained from her cheeks. I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out a small silver USB. "One more exhibit, Your Honor. An audio recording from 8:25 p.m., 2 weeks ago." The sound filled the courtroom. Caroline's voice was sharp, low, unmistakable. "If the judge asks, say you don't want to stay with Daddy because he can't take care of you. Tell them you want to live with me." Then came Kennedy's small, trembling answer. "But Mom, I love Daddy. I don't want to lie." The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. Caroline shot to her feet, shouting that it was fabricated. No one moved. The judge's face hardened. I explained that the file was verified by Robert Fields, retired investigator from the Denver District Attorney's Office. Elijah nodded, motioning for quiet. He called for Kennedy. The door opened, and she walked in holding her small stuffed rabbit, her eyes red but determined. She climbed into the witness chair and spoke softly. "I love my daddy. He helps me with my drawings. I don't want to lie anymore." Her words broke the room open. Some people wiped their eyes. Others just sat stunned. Jackson bowed his head, crying quietly. I rested my hand on his shoulder. Elijah turned toward me, his tone filled with quiet respect. "Years ago, you walked away from power to keep your integrity. I see that nothing has changed." For a moment, no one spoke. Even Caroline's lawyer seemed frozen, papers limp in her hands. Elijah drew a breath, then said firmly, "This court will recess until 2 p.m. Final judgment will be delivered." Then the gavel struck once, crisp and final. Around us, whispers swirled, but I stayed seated beside my son. Kennedy turned and smiled faintly. That was all I needed. For the first time in many years, I felt no rage, no grief, only quiet certainty. The truth was no longer buried. It was standing tall in daylight. The courtroom was packed when we returned that afternoon. The air felt thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Judge Elijah entered at 2 o'clock sharp, his expression calm but unreadable. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the verdict in a voice that carried the weight of finality. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court rules in favor of Mr. Jackson Fletcher. The property located at Riverbend Lane remains his sole and rightful ownership as it was acquired prior to marriage. Full custody of Kennedy Fletcher will be granted to her father and grandfather, while Mrs. Caroline Torres shall receive supervised visitation under court oversight. The sound that followed was not applause, not even whispers, but a quiet wave of release. Jackson lowered his head, and his shoulders began to shake, silent tears slipping down his face. I placed my hand on his back, feeling the tremor fade into steady breaths. Kennedy ran from her seat and threw her arms around him. For the first time in years, my son smiled, not out of politeness, but because the weight had finally lifted. Elijah closed the folder, his tone softer now. "Justice has its pace, Mr. Fletcher, but it has never forgotten you." I nodded in gratitude, unable to speak. Caroline sat motionless, her face pale and drawn. Elaine gathered her papers quietly, avoiding her gaze. When the gavel struck for the last time, Caroline stood, turned slowly, and walked out of the courtroom. There was no anger in her eyes, only emptiness, the kind that comes when a person realizes the truth too late. Outside, the late sunlight spilled through the courthouse doors, warm and golden, washing over Jackson and Kennedy as they stepped into the open air. For the first time in a long while, it felt like morning again. In the weeks that followed, the world settled into quieter rhythms. News spread that Caroline's wealthy companion had left her once he learned she had lost the case. The expensive car disappeared from her driveway. Her name, once whispered with envy, became a topic people spoke of softly with pity. One afternoon near dusk, I saw her standing at the edge of our fence. She looked older, thinner, her hands trembling as she held a small envelope. She said she was sorry, that she had been terrified of being forgotten, terrified of living small. Her voice cracked when she said she only wanted to feel in control of her life. I listened in silence. Behind her words, I could hear regret, not excuses. When she looked up, tears clinging to her lashes, I told her there was nothing left to forgive. The damage was done, but so was the lesson. She nodded once and walked away, and I watched her go without resentment. Some people learn through loss what others learn through love. That night, we sat down to dinner together, just the three of us. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, the kind of scent that used to fill our home before everything fell apart. Kennedy laughed as she told a story from school, her voice bright and sure. Jackson joined in, his legs still weak, but his spirit lighter. The house felt alive again, filled with ordinary warmth that no court could give or take away. Later, when the dishes were done and the lights dimmed, I sat on the porch. The last rays of sun brushed across my old briefcase on the table beside me. Its leather was cracked, its corners worn, but it looked peaceful now, like something that had served its purpose. I closed it gently, hearing the soft click of the lock, and let the quiet settle around me. Life, I thought, has a way of returning what it owes, though never in the form we expect. Justice sometimes sleeps, but it never dies. Truth and family, once found again, cannot be taken away. I looked toward the window where Jackson and Kennedy were laughing, their silhouettes framed by the warm light of home. And for the first time in many years, I felt that peace had finally chosen to stay. Subscribe to Scarred Justice for more real stories of courtroom comebacks and family fights that hit home.